Yeah. In a faculty meeting. Go figure. How we doing here, Matt?
Wonderful.
All right. Okay, so one of the things that we are going to have to know and be able to do within strength and conditioning is to be able to test appropriately. Now, one of the things that people have been going to a lot because of the decrease in cost of devices like force plates and load cells is the utilization of isometrics to be able to evaluate strength. Now, because of that, let's think about this. What are the things that we usually use to develop lower body strength and total body strength for human performance? What are some examples? Back squat,
Yeah, front squat, split
front squat, clean, deadlift. What these things are all dynamic. Now, whenever we're doing an isometric, we're usually testing something that isn't trained. So how good is the person's technique? How are they going to understand how they're supposed to perform on this test if they haven't been training it? Well, that's one of the downsides of using isometrics. So what we need to do is look and see how many times do we need to do a test? Do we need familiarization sessions to actually get good data? Okay, because if you don't do this, you don't know if this is actually due to a change in the person's strength or a change into their understanding and efficiency of doing the movement. So that's what we need to look and find out, and that was the purpose of today's study. So the study is how many familiarization sessions does the isometric squat test require for stable results? Now this is used with the college athletes over at Loughborough College. Now I also want to bring this up because I looked at 3 different studies trying to figure out which one I wanted to pop up. This is the one that I did. I don't remember which one that this one was as I stop here and think. I think that they used university athletes from Loughborough, and they were a bit on the weak side, I think, if I remember correctly. We'll see here in a moment. But I just wanted to take a second to note that there are differences in the educational systems, especially in the athletic systems. You see, like high school and college usually lasts 3 as opposed to 4 years. They do less of the gen ed, but athletically, the athletic systems over there are very different. Now, people compete for clubs as opposed to schools. So the university athletics usually isn't that good. They're going to be saying university athletes, and you're like, you call that athletic? Well, it's more like club sports and rec sports here would be that level of athlete. Somebody who is a competitive club sport athlete is what we're thinking of. So why this study exists, like I'd mentioned, getting good data on isometrics is harder than it looks. So why are people using isometric tests? Well, for one, it's fast. How long does it take to get a squat max on somebody who's strong? You got to warm up and go all the way through. How long is that going to take?
Like an hour.
40 minutes, an hour,
Yeah.
hour and 15 minutes if we get some people with 700-800 pound squatters. Well, how long does it take to be able to do a 1 rep isometric strength test? 3 to 6 seconds. Okay, so we can see that time handoff is definitely intriguing. It's fast, it's safe. What is the likelihood if the test is set up properly? Meaning that we aren't coming forward and creating a huge moment of the lumbar spine, that we have a relatively upright torso. What's the likelihood of getting hurt here? It's very, very small. We're talking 0.5% likelihood. Yet we're talking at like a 3.5 to 4% likelihood of injury and by injury, I just even mean tweaking something. Okay, I don't mean blowing out an ACL, blowing out a hamstring. I mean just tweaking something. There's like a 3% likelihood of that occurring. Okay? Now, isometrics, because of the cost of force plates going down so much, where whenever I started to get a single force plate, you would have a minimum investment of $25,000. Well, now things like Pasco are out there that will have a single axis force plate that's a lot smaller for $500. So you can see that the cost trade-off has made it to be attainable for people. Now, I'm not saying Pasco's the best thing to use. I'm not saying that. It's good and it's reliable, but it does have weaknesses because of its design. It's $500 for a reason. It's educational equipment. It's not going to withstand a lot of the more rigorous stuff. And it's also only single axis. Whenever we look at multiple axis force plates, that goes up. We'll go over the purposes of that at a different time. Now, maximal isometric effort is a learned skill. Okay, now I can tell you from my days as being a strength coach and a sports scientist that to be able to get somebody to have a proper force time trace to where it's going straight up and down requires several attempts and education with the athlete to make sure that they're able to do it appropriately. So on that hand, it kind of sucks. So the question is, how many sessions does it take before the data are stable and interpretable? If the data is not stable, you don't know what you're dealing with, okay, at all. So there's a lot of people who want to argue about things like rate of force development and it being unstable. Is it the metric that is unstable, or is it the lack of familiarity of the athlete with the test that's unstable? That's something that we have to think about and seriously address. Next slide. So the research question, what were they actually testing? They were actually testing how many familiarization sessions are required to have a stable peak force and a stable relative peak force. These are the two things that we are most concerned about, okay? How many trials per session are needing, and can we identify the learning effects and when those stop contaminating the results, okay? Next slide. Oh, that sucks, but okay. Who was studied? They had 15 strength-trained male college athletes. This is why I wanted to look at this study, because it's using the college age and it's using trained, okay? They had a mixed sport background. Why? Well, if they're at a university, and we just talked about it's basically club, right? They got to do it because they want to do it. Now, one thing about, even though they've been trained for 5 years, they had never done the isosquat. This is extremely important because guess what? If they had done it before, that's another session. So they already have a familiarization with the exercise. Whenever you get athletes coming in, they'll probably never have done this before. So this is exactly who you're dealing with. So this is not a novice population. And notice that even though it's not a novice population, what still occurs? Learning effects. Just like that, those who had last semester 629, where we showed the squat maxes for those baseball players, where the freshmen were not able to achieve the 1RM because their technique broke down. And you would think they're trained college athletes, they should be able to do a 1RM. There's learning effects on everything. Next slide. Okay, so it was a experimental design. They did it everything daily, okay, just about. They did 4 testing sessions, okay. They were done properly, meaning they paid attention to everything. They had 110 degrees of knee angle. They did a really, really good job of controlling all this. So it was about 24 hours apart and sometimes 48 hours apart. All of the tests occurred, I believe, within 7 days, okay? Every time they came in, they did 3 max trials per session, which is not uncommon. Most of the time you'll see 2 within 10% is what you see in research. So they went ahead and did 3. Now, time of the day, they tried to do it the same time every day. But what are we dealing with? We're dealing with humans. So, and if they're going to a university, what does that mean? They also have classes. So if they're coming in on Monday and Tuesday, well, at least for us, you got different classes on Monday and Tuesday. So they would try and come in about the same time. Didn't always work. This means that 12 max tests per athlete before the analysis even starts. Okay. Oh, hey, lifestyle was controlled, fatigue was minimized. Long story short, they're like, hey, don't go out and party this week, right? Because we don't want to have that be a confounding variable. We're going to have training minimized. We're going to try and control for nutrition as well. So here was the isometric squat setup. Now, knee was fixed at 110 degree knee angle. I believe it was, they had it here because they wanted to look at change of direction, and they were for something else, right? So they do it at this angle so that they could look at another test as well for comparability. Unless I got confused with one of the other studies, completely possible. I'm human, I make mistakes too. The bar was fixed. So the bar being fixed just means it can't move up anymore. Now, this is extremely important because force, what do we measure with force plates? Force, right there in the name. And force, what does it equal if we go back to Isaac Newton? Mass times acceleration. So if I start at the bottom pin and I move up as we're going, what have I introduced? Additional acceleration. And then when it hits the pins of the rack, well, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So I'll have the rack will be pushing additional force down into me, conflating the results. Okay, so you don't, confounding, not conflate, confounding the results. Words are hard today, apparently. The standardized, they sampled at 1,000 hertz to make sure that they caught everything. And they standardized the instructions. Really tough to understand. Push as hard and fast as you can. I'll tell people to unleash hell. They seem to understand that. Hard and as fast as they can. They don't seem to understand. I think that's remember, I'm a coach with a PhD, not an academic. There's a difference. And I think that's why sometimes people have a hard time with this test. People don't understand push as hard and fast as you can. It just doesn't work, okay? Bust out the nose torque, slap them around a little bit, and usually people start to get the picture, okay? So why would they test different knee angles? We don't need to go over this. Unfortunately, that is very blurry. I believe it was Aaron Bannon that created this little graph that showed, hey, if we are testing this degree, this is what it's mainly testing there, and this is why you want to test different degrees. That's just kind of a pearl. So going at 0 to 60 degrees, we're looking at maximum anterior shear force. So think there at the patella tendon. 15 to 30 degrees, okay, that very, very top part, we're looking at the peak of not just the anterior, but deep within, so we're at the ACL. 10 to 70, hamstring, 80 degree, quads, 50 to 90, maximum posterior force. We just keep going, the list goes on and on and on, okay? So what I'm saying, and the whole purpose of this, is if there's something that is very, very specific for you to test, you're like, I want to look at, I want to look at this for ACL prevention. What should you do? 15 to 30 degrees, okay? What if I am looking about the change of direction? I want to be at around 110 degrees, near those maximum compressive forces. That's what's going to be occurring at that point in time. Next slide. With the data processing, they turned it from an unfiltered to a filter. What does that do? That eliminates what's called artifact. Okay, so something that just kind of happens as a result of an electric spike or something else of you moving, that would be considered an artifact. That's not the real data. So they do an attempt to smooth that line out to prevent that from occurring. Peak force was extracted, and then they normalized peak force to body mass. Okay, that's all relative peak force is. And they used the best effort per trial. So the peak of that trial was utilized. Now here's the deal. We have to make sure that all of our data is good, even including standing before we go. It's like, why? Everything is based on a baseline. and the change from that baseline. So if somebody is doing this as they're in the weighing period, they're dancing around because the music's playing, what is that going to do? That signal is going to be going like this. And it might be way low. Now, I told this to some of the people in 647 last week. I'm not going to use names because I'm recording and it might hit social media, so I'm going to leave this stuff out. But one of the first times that I had gotten force plates, my experience with force plates started with a guy named Jason Lake, who's a professor at the University of Chichester, and he taught me how to do the basics of it. Well, I got started with Pasco force plates because I had to pay for it, right? So could I afford $6,000 or $25,000? No. At the time, they were only about $200 because this is 15 years ago, right? So I got a set of those plates. Now, the thing about Pasco plates is they are 13 inches by 13 inches, okay? So for most of us in here, no problem. Our basketball strength coach, whenever I was at Mizzou, heard that I had force plates. He wanted me to jump test the guys. Well, what do we know about basketball players? They're pretty tall, and what do tall people have? Big feet, so they don't trip all over the place. It's got to go into proportion, right? Well, what do you think a size 17 shoe, how do you think that fits on a size 13 plate? It doesn't. And I didn't know how important that quiet standing was. Now, we had the basketball team do jumps with their hands on their hips. We had an individual who's playing in the NBA right now. Whenever he jumped, it said he had a 1.48 meter high jump with hands on hips. Well, I got news for you. He might be a hell of a basketball player and he might be elastic, but ain't nobody jumping, what is that, like 60 inches with their hands on their hips and no approach, okay? So it was flawed. Now, was it flawed because of the plate? No, it was flawed because of me. I didn't handle that appropriately. So we got to make sure that we know that if we put garbage in, even with that quiet standing period, we're going to get garbage out where we're seeing a 60 centimeter jump instead of a 35 or 45 centimeter jump. Okay, next slide. So with the math, okay, but that's all, folks. I'm feeling like up here today. ANOVA isn't enough. It doesn't give enough depth of information. It can't handle the complexity of real life beings in this situation. So they used general linear mixed models where the subjects were random effects and the session and trials fixed effects. For y'all in here right now, don't worry about that. This is statistical jargon, but just realize that sometimes ANOVA isn't appropriate. We need to use a little bit more intensive techniques, and this is a great way to do it. Gamma distribution, because there was non-normal force data. I believe it was the kurtosis was 3, which isn't acceptable, but there were no extremes on the data. So don't worry about it. I'm reading, that's from the paper that I just read before I came down. And that's why I was like, hey, Clay, will you go get this paper? And then I'm like, no, there's 7 papers up there, 3 article reviews that I got to do for JSCR and 4 articles that I'm looking at. He's going to pick the wrong one. I'm not going to get him mad and me mad. And then the interclass correlations and coefficient of variation, well, these are reliability measures, so they were thrown in as well. So this is measurement science, not just performance testing. We are trying to make sure the measurements are good, because if you do crap measurements, guess what you get?
Crap results.
Crap output, which is going to be the training that you're trying to do to fix those measures. Next slide. So, main finding number 1, the number of sessions mattered. What that means is session number 1 was significantly different from all the others. Sessions 2 through 4 were similar, but there was still high coefficient of variation in session 2. Session 3 and session 4, there were no further changes. Okay? So, performance stabilized by session 3. So, did they get stronger in 3 days? No. They learned how to do the test in 3 days, which is why the improvements, the peak forces went up. and the coefficients of variation went down. So, trials matter too. Trials effects existed within the session. So trial 3 was often better than trial 1. Well, why? Because you get better at it each time. You know what it feels like. So, but the changes from 3 to 1 went lower every testing session until session 3 when it was virtually nil. So doing one trial, just because you did one repetition doesn't mean you actually got their max. So go ahead and do 3 and you want to see agreement. Now interclass correlations, the reliability improved whenever they dropped out like the session 1 data. So the interclass correlation was only about 0.9. That's right? Because they call it a 95% confidence interval is what you're going for. It improved after they dropped out session 1 because you got rid of the real crap data and then you had better stuff. So coefficient of variation dropped below 10% by session 3. That's important because I just need you to, I don't care if you know anything else about this, okay? Coefficient of variation, that means how stable are you? If you have less than 10% variation within your test, you can use that for monitoring. If you've got more than that, that's just way too much error, okay? That's like reaching into a bucket and randomly picking out a tape measure each time instead of always using the same tape measure. Sometimes you'll be on, sometimes you'll be off, okay? You don't fix noisy data with better stats, meaning some people are like, well, we'll use this to control for this statistically. No, that's dumb. That's like saying it's okay if I burn my dinner, I'll scrape off the burnt parts. That's stupid. Just cook it right to begin with, all right? You fix it with the methods to begin. So what did it take? The actual answer, 3 familiarizations, 3 trials per session, and they got there. Then it was stable peak force and stable relative peak force. This is meaningful between athlete comparisons. We got to make sure that they're doing the thing right. It's important that this is the minimum, not the maximum. Okay, so we need to make sure what we're getting. We might, since session, what do we mean by that? Trial 1 was the lowest. Trial 3 was always the highest. So let's make sure that we're getting to the highest. Why it measures for practitioners. The real world applications, if you're only testing one time, you're only testing how well they learned the test. You're not testing what their actual capability is. If you test twice, we do it today, do it tomorrow. Still unstable for many athletes, and if you don't standardize, any comparison is meaningless. That pre-post stuff doesn't mean anything, okay? That is, you want the honest God's truth on that. Whenever people are doing that, you know what that is? That's recruiting. You're using this cool, sexy tool just to look good. Nothing wrong with it, but we just got to be honest about what it is. Okay, we can't make training recommendations on a circus act. Okay, if you rush, you misinform programming, readiness, or return to play. Okay, next slide. So the big picture takeaways, what this really teaches, this isometric testing, guys, you can't just go and do it. Okay, you have to familiarize if you want good data. High quality data requires time, planning, and discipline. And that's not even saying that you have to actually get them on the force plates to do it though, okay? What I mean is we could have some familiarization sessions where you just have the pins flipped over, flipped out, and you get to the right position and you pull hard against it. That could be part of the familiarization, and maybe you're using that as like a potentiation for something heavy. Find ways to incorporate your familiarization sessions so they don't seem like something extra, okay? Quick testing often means low confidence decisions. For example, I had an athlete, the first time that we did counter movement jump with women's basketball at Miami. There was an athlete who popped up with a 37% asymmetry, and it was consistent on every repetition. Now, did the athlete have that bad of an asymmetry? ended up not being that bad. It ended up being pronounced. It was like a 21%. 37% is let's wrap you in bubble wrap. 21% is we're at an increased risk for injury. So the PT and I did a little overreaction to seeing the 37%. The little overreaction was just doing some making sure she learned how to land type testing or type work activities. That's never a bad idea for anybody. In fact, that's an evergreen thing, but that's one of the first things you do whenever you see somebody who's at risk for an ACL tear, is you make sure they know how to land and go to muscular dominance instead of ligamentum dominance, right? So the quality of your decisions can never exceed the quality of your data. If you have shit data, you have shit recommendations, okay? I don't know how to say it any more clearly than that. It's imperative that you do the familiarization so we know what we're dealing with, okay? And it should be the QR. Oh, I forgot about this. Now, we talked about the isosquat. Everybody likes to do the isometric mid-thigh pull. So I put up a couple of things for like a little, just hey, which one should I do? And I'll tell you this, guys, I noticed the same thing on the isometric mid-thigh pull. It took 3 sessions to get good data with our athletes at Mizzou. I didn't test it. I didn't do that. Ooh. No, I can't do that because they were too far apart, right? We were doing it every 6 weeks, and that third and the fourth test were the same. Our first and second tests were vastly different. They didn't gain 40% strength. Okay, setup. Where is it? Well, if it's isosquat, guess what? It's on your back. If it's mid-thigh pull, it's down here. Familiarization. It's high, they're saying high on the isosquat and moderate to high on the IMTP because a lot of people will do mid-thigh pulls. So they'll already understand that position. Technical demand. Dude, I think it's higher on the mid-thigh pull, but the research says that it is higher on the squat. I don't get it, but that could be because what was my athletic background? If we could call it that. Powerlifting. Squatting is second nature to me. A lot of the athletes will do more cleans than they will do squats, so that's more natural to them. The learning effect, both of them have learning effect. Joint body angles, we're testing something different, squat versus pull positions. Both have got a vertical force expression, and how much error do they use if you're rushed? Well, with the isometric squat, the only thing you're at risk for is underestimating the peak force. But on the mid-thigh pull, you could screw up the whole test, right? Because it's kind of you got to get into the right position and force through the heels and everything and drive with the hips. And if they try and force at the wrong spot, the data gets bad. Okay, next slide. Now the conclusion, go ahead, Faith.
So what about iso belt squat?
So iso belt squat is going to be different, okay? And it's going to be different because you're not going to be able to get the rate of force developments and the early onset impulses because we've got slack that exists within the chain, and that gets back to that F equals MA. Now also, that fixed point is not truly fixed, right? You can cantilever a tremendous amount on the iso squat, and I don't remember what Madison's dissertation showed, but there was a small increase in that anterior posterior because if it's a single anchor point, you can go forward and backward on it. Now I can't help but think and wonder, and I've brought this up before, it's going to be somebody else that finds out this answer. But if we attached a second anchor point, to the anterior posterior instead of just straight down below, would that get rid of that cantilever, that possibility of the anterior posterior movement, and then have better data? And the answer is I don't know. I think this should happen. It makes sense on the math, but we got to do something before we actually say that it worked.
So do you see different peak forces with the
Different,
bar
absolutely
and the
different peak
squat?
forces. You can't compare the two; they're not interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
So, your isometric mid-thigh pull can only be compared to the isometric mid-thigh pull of even the same knee angle, right? If we start changing knee and hip angle, well, then that's a different test as well. So yeah, these tests are not interchangeable at all. So, and that's a mistake that some people make. It's like, okay, well, we did IMTP last time, but now the guys are, their hands are all hurting, so let's go do a iso squat to get away from their hands hurting. Well, Problem is, we can't make any recommendations off of it, nor will we know if we saw improvements, increases or decreases.
So it just depends on the situation, like what the question is.
It does, and to me, it's not beyond just the question, it's what is the athlete most familiar with?
Okay.
Okay, so if they've been doing a lot of squats and they've never done cleans, what position are they gonna be unfamiliar with? The clean position, so that's gonna be bad data, and that might take more sessions to familiarize with, at least 3. Okay, but what if they have been doing a tremendous amount of cleans and they haven't been doing that many squats? Well, maybe all they do is Bulgarian and trap bar. They're not going to understand that squat position, so they're going to need to do, they would need to get a lot more familiarization to be able to do that, right? Okay, so the iso squat is not easier because it looks simpler. There's a learning curve to it, okay? Both tests, the mud thigh pull and the iso squat, require multiple sessions, but the iso squat is, they say, less forgiving. The less forgiving part becomes from the vertical compression. Okay, so if you get a little forward, you're more likely to hurt your back on the iso squat than you are on the isometric mid thigh pull. Okay, if you don't have time to familiarize, you don't have time to do the test. Take it from something else. Use your Brisky equation or your Epley equation on one of the other lifts that you're doing to test instead of assuming you're going to get good data from a shit test. Okay? All right. That's it. Any other questions before we move on? Cool. All right. I'm going to stop this. I'm not going to record anything else because